This is William Cornick, the boy who murdered Anne Maguire in her classroom after developing an irrational hatred of her. He talked for months about killing the popular teacher and in April this year carried out his threat, stabbing her repeatedly and chasing her from her Spanish lesson before she collapsed dying in a colleague's arms. Today, Cornick, who's now 16, pleaded guilty to murder, a remorseless teenager who says he's proud of what he did. Anne Maguire's family was in court to listen to his boasts. At one point there was shocked silence when it was revealed the boy had told psychiatrists, "I know the victim's family will be upset, but I don't care. In my eyes, everything I've done is fine and dandy." After the hearing, the family of Anne Maguire spoke outside.
No amount of punishment can ever compensate for the loss of Anne's life. No amount of punishment can compensate her family for what we have lost in our beautiful, selfless, caring and compassionate sister, mother, wife, auntie and nana.
We learnt today that on Christmas Eve last year, Will Cornick messaged a friend on Facebook saying Mrs Maguire deserves more than death. Then on the day of the murder, he showed other pupils knives he'd brought to school, but threatened to kill them if they told anyone. He winked at a fellow pupil before the attack and then went on to stab Anne Maguire 7 times with a large kitchen knife, before sitting back down in the classroom saying, "Good times." 17-year-old Tom Smith was in the same form as Cornick, but never thought he would do anything like that.
We used to play cards in the morning and, you know, just like general lads do, having fun, having a laugh and what have you. And he was just like probably one of the most intelligent people ever, like that I've seen and that I've known. But he was really quiet as well.
Anne Maguire's husband Don says Will Cornick's admission of murder does little to change things.
I may have feelings towards him, but the reality of life is that the feelings that I have won't improve our situation at all.
Every morning you wake up and there's that moment where you wish it just wasn't true, and I don't think that will change. I think for us the reality is that Mummy doesn't come home anymore.
And the reason she doesn't come home anymore is what they described in court as a monumental act of cowardice and evil carried out in front of a class at this school. In the dock, wiping away the odd tear, 2 15-year-old girls about to be jailed for as long as they've been alive. Punishment for slowly murdering a vulnerable woman. Giving the teenagers a minimum of 15 years each, the judge told them they'd carried out a cowardly attack, sustained over a long period of time, carried out with weapons in many different ways. This is the pair on CCTV just after they'd killed, laughing and sniggering as they call police for a lift home.
There's no need to be swearing, ringing up and swearing and going on like that. What's so funny?
Listed as vulnerable, they were used to officers coming to fetch them.
Right, you're in Stephen Street. We'll get somebody along there as soon as we can, all right?
Their victim, Angela Wrightson, was a 39-year-old alcoholic. It was a torturous attack on a helpless woman, using anything in her house they could lay their hands on. This man's daughters used to occasionally hang around with the killers. How does he feel now?
Scared. But it sort of makes me wonder what could have happened, God forbid, if she'd been with them that night. I like to think that she would have run a mile and made the quickest phone call, but it's something, you know, when your own kids are sort of near to it, you sort of start to worry about it.
She's like a happy-go-lucky girl at the time.
Another neighbour, who didn't want his face shown, knew one of the killers. He used his dog to clear freeloading youngsters out of Ms Wrightson's house at times. He believes today's sentences aren't long enough.
I've been in jail myself. I know what it's like. They're going to find it dead easy. Our jail sentences should be like America. If you commit murder, minimum 50 years before you even get out.
The attack here was horrific. In court, the older girl says she didn't believe such an assault could be fatal. She thought people could only die of cancer or if they were shot. Their life stories, though, are complicated. They were both in care and came from troubled, neglected backgrounds. And when the older girl was asked in court what her date of birth was, she said she didn't know it. That same girl did this drawing before the attack. What does this say about her mindset?
I would suspect they probably didn't know what the outcome of what they were doing would be. My feeling about their behaviour in this is that they've never been given any boundaries about what good behaviour is and what bad behaviour is.
The events in this street are now subject to serious case reviews. The two selfie-taking girls sentenced today describe themselves as true partners in crime. They join a short but notorious list of children who kill. Danny Savage, BBC News, Hartlepool.
Sebastian was a young teenage boy who spoke little, if any, English. He had neither friends nor allies in this country. Sebastian was wholly dependent upon you both for his well-being. The extent of the abuse, involving injuries to the torso, ribs, heart, lungs, to serious muscle injuries to the thigh and to the buttocks. 5. The extreme pain which you caused Sebastian and his very painful death. Latichevsky and Kalinowska, please stand up. Latichevsky, for the murder of Sebastian Kalinowski, the sentence of the court is imprisonment for life. I set the minimum term at 39 years. For the offence of cruelty to a child, the sentence is one of 9 years. Kalinowska, for the murder of your son, Sebastian Kalinowski, the sentence of the court is imprisonment for life. I set the minimum term at 39 years. For the offence of cruelty to a child, the sentence is one of 9 years.
If he's unconscious, he needs me. He needs warm clothes. He needs mum. He needs his look.
It's okay.
I feel so useless though.
I know.
It's not my fault. My son, he's alive, he's not here.
Okay, take a breath. When did you see him last?
I saw him in the bed last night. Logan!
Okay, take a breath. He's 5 and he's gone. Can you see it?
Logan!
Logan!
He's unconscious. Why is he unconscious?
Listen, I don't know. I don't know. Right now, the best thing...
All I'm getting is answers like this. Why is no one telling me what's going on?
I don't know. Sweetheart, look.
He's
please.
my baby. What's going on?
I need to do the job.
Lola James was a little ray of sunshine. Her father says she was beautiful, charming and cheeky. She died of a catastrophic brain injury inflicted by her mother's new partner. Kyle Bevan left Lola with more than 100 separate injuries. As he was jailed for her murder, the judge said he'd shown no remorse.
This was a sustained, deliberate and very violent attack.
He sentenced Bevan to life in prison.
The attack would have caused both mental and physical pain and suffering before the onset of coma. It was the culmination of several months of physical child abuse.
Lola's mother, Sinead James, tried to hide her face as she arrived at court. She was jailed for 6 years. The judge said she'd prioritised her relationship with Bevan over concern for her daughter. She'd let Bevan move into her squalid home in Pembrokeshire as the country went into the first national lockdown. Within 5 months, Lola was dead. Bevan showed no reaction in the dock as the judge detailed the horrific attack that happened overnight. As Lola fell unconscious, Bevan took photos and even a video of her. And instead of calling for help, he spent time washing Lola and cleaning the house to try to cover up what he'd done. He lied that she'd been pushed down the stairs by the dog. When Lola's mother woke up, she called an ambulance.
Just to confirm, is she conscious?
Is she conscious? I don't even... Yeah, she's conscious. She's breathing and everything. Just sleeping. Can you go sit with her, please? I'm really scared.
Lola's father was in court to see Bevan and James jailed. In a statement, he said, "I miss Lola and my heart hurts. Her tiny body was savaged in the evilest way. She didn't stand a chance. All I have been left with is guilt, heartache, pain and torment." Lola and her family had previously been referred to social services. A review will now establish if more could have been done to save her.
Here, with her aunt, being loved and cared for, Star had an infectious, cheeky smile.
She was a really good baby. She rarely ever cried.
But her short life in the care of her mother was increasingly traumatic until she was beaten to death, aged 16 months old. Her mother, Frankie Smith, on the left, admitted she'd been cruel, but blamed her lover, Savannah Brockhill, on the right, for the killing. The pair had been in what was described as a toxic relationship in the 11 months leading to Star's death.
Guys and girls need to remember the fact that Frankie is with me. She keeps getting a lot of message requests and friends requests. She's not going to accept. And if you want to keep your kneecaps, I suggest you stop sending her them. She's with the #1 psycho. Me and my princess girl. Who's a pretty girl? Who's a pretty girl? Who's spoiled? Who's spoiled? Can I knock my cheek back? Is it good for stuck to yours like glue or something?
Smith and Brockhill both claimed to be out of the room when Starr was beaten and left with catastrophic abdominal injuries. They were the only adults at this flat here in Keighley near Bradford when it happened, and instead of calling an ambulance, they Googled shock in babies and how to bring a baby out of shock 11 minutes before texting 999. When the paramedics arrived, it was too late.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
Yeah, she's breathing.
Is she conscious?
Yes. She's a bit of both, really. Basically, it's my partner's daughter. It's my little girl as well. I brought her up. We've got all 3 children here playing, and I was in the kitchen making a coffee, and they've been in the living room, and I heard a bang. So I came out, and the little lad stood there, and the little girl's on the floor, and she was crying, and then she stopped crying, and then she was sick, and now she's just a little bit floppy, to be honest with you.
Starr's death has shocked this Yorkshire town. A post-mortem found the toddler had other older injuries, including a fractured skull and leg. It would later emerge that family members and friends had made repeated calls to social services after seeing Star bruised.
Well, we were hearing things like she were being slam choked. Now, we didn't know what that was, but it's obviously something that Savannah had been doing with. Savannah had sent me a message and it said, grow up, David. You know what I mean? It's our child. I says, how come every time you've got Star, she comes back covered in bruises? I said, we keep seeing pictures of her. We've seen her, like, you know, Yvonne Walker, and she's covered in bruises. She says, all kids get bruises.
She and her partner persuaded caseworkers that the alerts were malicious, the injuries accidental. But evidence of their cruelty stacked up. The lover, Brock Hill, was a security guard, contracted to provide out-of-hours security at a recycling plant on this industrial estate in Doncaster. Sometimes she brought Star with her on the job. Clearly, it's highly unusual for a security worker to bring a toddler to work on an industrial estate. And when police discovered that's what Brock Hill had done, they did a CCTV trawl and discovered footage of her beating Star 21 times. The day before Star's death, CCTV showed her mother dragging her through this part of Bradford like a puppet, the child crying when trying to walk. When Smith suggested taking her to hospital, Brock Hill said Star was just having a tantrum. In a text exchange the day Star died, Brock Hill says, "You doing?" Smith replies, "Sorting this child out. Gave her food and she ate it all. Now she's sat on the floor saying no and nipping and biting her arm. Daft child. Ragged my hair out, smacked me, sick to death of it." Brock Hill says, "Do what you did last night and put her in the corner." Smith, "Done it." Stood crying at the wall. Brock Hill, "Good." Making Star stand in the corner was a common punishment, particularly cruel considering she had a fractured leg. This case, of course, raises more questions about the protection of children, along with the recent death of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes, tortured by his father and stepmother. Star had a loving extended family like David Fawcett, great step-grandfather, here playing guitar to her. He also warned social services, one of multiple alerts that flagged the dangers but somehow didn't lead to the action that could have saved her.
The murder of Arthur Labinjo Hughes has shocked the nation. The smiling superhero, starved, poisoned and beaten to death. Outside the house where he was killed, flowers, balloons and messages for a little boy who died thinking no one loved him. Killed by his own father and stepmother. Their abuse of Arthur was reported to the authorities. Pictures of bruising on Arthur's shoulder sent by relatives to both police and social services, but they concluded there were no concerns. Now a warning that children are still at risk of mistakes being made. David Jameson was Police and Crime Commissioner in the West Midlands at the time of Arthur's death.
The ability of the police to follow those through with the thoroughness that they really required was seriously limited by the austerity measures, by the cuts to the police force and the cuts to social services and other bodies as well. I think children are at risk, yes. Clearly, there was so much to investigate, so much to do, that some cases have slipped through the net.
Failed by the system and the people he trusted most to take care of him.
After when I played for Liverpool, I prefer for Tottenham.
The death of a little boy who dreamed of being a footballer will now be the subject of local and national investigations.
Just briefly, what happened?
Basically, he'd gone out to get me a birthday cake and stuff for kids. Arthur was told to sit on the thinking step. Arthur's put himself all over the floor. He's banged himself off the radiator. He's hit me. He's kicked me in the process of me trying to get him back on the thinking step. He's then gone on all fours on the floor, and I've told him to get up. And I shut the door over, and all I heard was a crack off the floor. He was headbutting the floor on all fours. Headbutted the floor once, said, "Off, get up, you're going to hurt yourself. I've phoned your dad." He went, "I don't care." At that point, he was fine. And then he dropped his head again as I've tried to bear hug him and pick him up, and he headbutted the floor 3 times.
Here on this
carpet? Round about, the door was shut, so if you go in, I'll show you. Because it's probably about here his head was, but it's concrete, there's no underlay under that. he'd banged his head 3 or 4 times. Obviously then went and picked him up. He'd knocked himself unconscious. I picked him up, put him on the sofa, poured water in his mouth.
So you come in, he's banged his head 3 or 4
I was
times
in the living room,
here.
I was in the kitchen, then I'd sat down in the living room and that's when he threw himself on the floor.
And you heard him banging his
Him
head.
bang his head.
So what did you do?
I came out to him and told him to get up. He told me no. So I tried to bear hug him and put my arms underneath him and pick him up. And he dropped and he banged his head another 3 times off the floor. And as I picked him up, he hit me and he kicked me as I was trying to get him up.
And then what? So, and you went?
I picked him up off the floor.
Yeah.
Tried to put him on the stairs just to get him to, but his head's obviously going out, so I put him straight on the stairs. I said, "Beverly, I've got to phone an ambulance."
So he's unresponsive?
Yeah. Like I say, he's like, the last 6 months, he's battered both my kids. He's smashed this house to pieces. He's battered his dad. He's hit me. When I tried to get him off the floor from headbutting the floor, he headbutted me and he kicked me and he's hit me. Yesterday we went to my friend's house and he pushed me down 5 stairs. "You're not my real mum, I hate you. I'm going to get my mum to kill you," he said. And even so, I've done my best for that kid. He hates me. I tried to get him off the floor.
When 10-month-old Finlay Bowden died on Christmas Day in 2020, he'd endured weeks of pain. Battered and bruised at the hands of his parents, Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden, at the family home in Chesterfield. Shortly after being born, Finlay was removed from his parents amid concerns he might suffer significant harm. Derbyshire County Council argued living conditions at his home were filthy and that there was a risk of domestic violence. But over the next 6 months, the couple set about persuading social services they'd made positive changes. Shannon Marsden even sent photos she'd taken, showing the house looking clean and tidy. And in October, a family court ruled Finlay should be returned to his parents. Court documents released yesterday showed the local authority had wanted a 4-month transition to monitor Finlay's progress, amid concerns over the parents' cannabis use. But a guardian working for CAFCAS, the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service, recommended a 6 to 8 week period. Following legal advice, 2 magistrates agreed, and by November the 20th, Finlay was back home. But it was all a pack of lies. Just 39 days later, Finlay would be dead. A post-mortem examination revealed he had more than 130 injuries to his body, including fractures and burns. When police entered the family home, they found abject squalor, with dirty nappies, soiled bedsheets, rancid baby milk bottles and drugs paraphernalia. CAFCAS have since said it wasn't possible to say whether a longer transition plan would have prevented Finlay's death, and that no one could have predicted from what was known at the time that his parents were capable of such cruelty, or there was a risk they'd intentionally hurt him, let alone murder him. A child safeguarding review into Finlay's death is also underway. Last month, after a lengthy trial, Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden were both found unanimously guilty of murder. Neither showed any remorse as they were led from the dock.
For too long, Tracy Connolly and Stephen Barker enjoyed the protection of the courts. But baby Peter's mother and her boyfriend can finally be named as the couple responsible for the death of an innocent. It was here at this North London hospital where baby Peter's short life ended and where the full horror of this tragic case unfolded. He was admitted to accident and emergency in August 2007 with multiple injuries, including a broken back and fractured ribs. Inflicted by a man who should have cared for and protected the toddler. But then Stephen Barker had a history of sadism, of torturing both people and animals. Abused and brutalised himself as a boy, Barker developed into a classic bully. He had a fascination for Hitler and kept a collection of Nazi memorabilia, including helmets and daggers. Haringey Council have vowed to learn the lessons of this tragedy, where baby Peter's abuse was never uncovered, despite numerous visits by social services and the fact he was on the at-risk register. But Tracy Connolly knew how to work the system. She grew up around social services. Her mother suffered from drink and drug problems. Her biological father was a sex offender and absent for most of her life. and at 12 years old, Connolly was sent to boarding school for delinquent children. This was Tracy Connolly's wedding in 2003 to baby Peter's father, but she would soon begin cheating on him with Stephen Barker. Connolly and Barker moved here to Tottenham, where the abuse began. His mother did her best to hide his injuries, smothering his face with chocolate on occasions to cover the bruises. Neighbours here remember little of the family who kept such a horrific secret, until the day an ambulance pulled up outside the house.
Walked down to the corner to have a look, and I saw the ambulance man rushing out, cradling the baby in his arms and taking it into the ambulance. It's shocking to know that these sort of things go on, you know, in this sort of area that you're living in.
Tracy Connolly told friends that initially she was happy living in this house with Stephen Barker, but things changed dramatically when Stephen's older brother, the third defendant in this case, moved in here. Jason Owen had a long history of deceit. He had previous convictions for theft and arson after setting his home on fire to claim back the money. He was on the run from the authorities with his 15-year-old girlfriend. And although he was bailed following baby Peter's death, he was rearrested after applying for a passport. We can also reveal that the brothers were arrested in the mid-90s over allegations they bullied and assaulted their elderly grandmother at this house in Kent to try to get her to change her will. But the 82-year-old died of pneumonia before her case could be brought to court.
We'd heard that she had been terrorised by the boys. They'd bought Guy Fawkes masks that stood at the window with them. They'd frightened her. They'd locked her in a wardrobe looking for her will. They'd locked her indoors so that she couldn't go out. Then they forced her to go out to the bank to draw money out for them.
In a cemetery in North London, a tiny gravestone bears the simple first name initial of an anonymous victim. But the lifting of this court order now allows baby Peter Connolly the dignity of his name back.
Outside the home in Killamarsh where he'd murdered his partner and 3 children, Damien Bendal is about to tell police what he's done.
So we're told, I know what's going to happen to you now, mate.
Well, I know what's going to happen when you go to prison, obviously, but again...
Wow, what have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
Yeah.
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
Inside, officers found the bodies of Terry Harris, Bendal's pregnant partner, her 2 children, 13-year-old John Paul Bennett and 11-year-old Lacey, and Lacey's friend, Connie Gent, who'd been staying for a sleepover.
Damien, it's 07:47 hours. I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder.
The children had spent the day selling sweets to raise money for cancer research. It was as they were getting ready for bed that Bendal went round the house, attacking them with a claw hammer. Then, as Lacey lay dying, he raped her. In the early hours of the following morning, Bendal left the home where his victims lay dead with the Xbox that belonged to the boy he'd murdered. He took a taxi to Sheffield where he exchanged it for drugs. He returned to the house and appeared calm as he went to a nearby shop to buy tobacco. He was described in court as truly evil, a drug addict with a long history of violence.
The level of force and violence that was carried out in these attacks was carried out with one intention, and that was to take the lives of those within the premises. They'd all, by the nature of their relationship, come to trust Bendal, and he took the opportunity to shatter that trust. These horrendous attacks and the force and the weapon used would have left persons inside the premises very quickly incapacitated.
In statements read to the court, John Paul and Lacey's father said, "I will not see them grow up. I will not have the opportunity to be a granddad. I am angry. Their life, their future has been taken away from them. I am lost without them and I need them." Connie's father said, "I feel like part of my identity has been taken and feel like I do not know who I am or what my purpose in life is anymore. My heart is totally broken and shattered into pieces." The police described Bendal as a monster. Sentencing Bendal to a whole life prison term, the judge told him the murders were brutal, vicious and cruel and had caused utter devastation for his victims' families. It was an inexplicable, apparently motiveless attack on 4 vulnerable and defenceless victims.